Elton John vanished last summer without explanation. When he finally came back, he couldn't even sign his own name anymore. Doctors say they don't know if he'll ever recover. His new album comes from a very dark place of doubt. Is this why he suddenly canceled everything? The real story is about to come out, and it's not the infection his team claimed. Elton John's story began in a quiet living room, not a music hall. At just 4 years old, little Reginald Dwight sat at his grandmother's piano and, without any lessons, played The Skater's Waltz perfectly by ear. His mother was stunned. He hadn't been taught, he just listened once and knew how to play. That kind of raw talent would define his entire life. Even when he finally did start lessons at age 7, one teacher said he could hear a long classical piece once and play it back like a recording. By the time he was a boy, he was already the center of attention at family gatherings, mimicking Jerry Lee Lewis and performing with flair. That self-taught spark made him different, and it carried him forward. When he was 11, despite growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Pinner, Middlesex, he earned a scholarship to the prestigious Royal Academy of Music in London. Each Saturday, he traveled into the city for lessons in classical music. He was a top student, but deep down, he didn't love it. He once admitted he barely practiced and sometimes skipped class to ride the subway instead. Still, his natural talent kept him ahead. Everything changed in 1967. One day on a band bus ride with his group Bluesology, someone asked him a simple question. "Now that we've made it, what are you going to call yourself?" That's when Reginald Dwight stopped being Reginald Dwight. He chose a new name by combining those of his bandmates, Elton Dean and Long John Baldry. He wanted something original, something that stood out. He legally changed it a few years later to Elton Hercules John, picking the middle name Hercules not for the myth, but from a horse on a British sitcom. The name gave him freedom. It let him leave behind his quiet beginnings and step into a larger life. Before he became a star, Elton did what many struggling musicians did: session work. In 1969, he quietly played piano on the Hollies' hit "He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother." He was paid just £12. He wasn't credited, but his playing added real emotion to the song. Around that same time, he also sang background vocals on Tom Jones's hit "Delilah." These behind-the-scenes roles sharpened his skills and proved he could handle anything musically, even if the world didn't know his name yet. The turning point came because of a small ad in a music magazine. Liberty Records was looking for talent, and both Elton and a teenage lyricist named Bernie Taupin applied. Elton told the record executive he could write music, but not lyrics. The executive handed him Bernie's poetry, and that moment changed both their lives. Elton read Bernie's words on the train ride home and was instantly inspired. Soon after, they met and started working together. They wrote for other singers at first, but their true magic happened when they created songs for Elton himself. Their partnership, built from a random ad, would last for decades. But things didn't go smoothly at first. Their debut album, Empty Sky, came out in 1969 and went nowhere. Elton was heartbroken. He thought the songs were brilliant, especially the title track. But the album was too strange, blending psychedelic sounds and odd instruments. It didn't even get released in the US until years later, after Elton had already become famous. That early failure forced him and Bernie to rethink everything. They started writing simpler, more direct songs, and that changed everything. One day in 1969, in Elton's mother's kitchen, Bernie scribbled down the lyrics to a song on a piece of paper during breakfast. It even had tea stains on it. He handed it to Elton, who walked to the piano and, within 20 minutes, had composed the melody to Your Song. It became his first major hit, breaking into the top 10 in both the US and the UK. The lyrics were so sincere, even though Bernie had never been in love. And to this day, no one really knows who the song was about. What's most surprising about Elton is how different he was off stage. Early on, he was shy, even insecure. When friends first saw him perform in the UK, he barely moved. But that changed during a trip to the US, especially during his breakthrough show at the Troubadour in Los Angeles. Suddenly, he became bold, theatrical, unforgettable. He danced, strutted, and owned the stage. His friend Stuart Epps was shocked. It was like watching a completely different person. Elton later explained that the stage version of himself was a way to escape his fears. "Elton gave me the freedom to be the person that Reg was too afraid to be," he said. Between 1972 and 1975, Elton John did something no one else had ever done. He released 7 albums in a row that all hit #1 in the US. For nearly 40 weeks during those years, he ruled the charts. At one point, it felt like every other month, a new Elton album was sitting at the top. It all started with Honky Chateau in 1972. That album gave us Rocket Man and spent 5 weeks at #1. Then came Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Caribou, his greatest hits album, Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy, and Rock of the Westies. Each one climbed straight to the top. And remember, this all began when he was just 24 years old. Before Honky Chateau, none of his albums had ever hit #1 anywhere. Suddenly, he couldn't stop. This wasn't just about numbers. These years were his creative peak. 6 of those albums would later be named among the greatest ever made. During this same wild stretch, Elton also formed a deep friendship with John Lennon. Their bond grew quickly. Lennon was going through a tough time, separated from Yoko Ono and living in Los Angeles, partying hard and feeling lost. Elton became a steady presence in his life. They teamed up on a song Lennon had started after hearing a late-night preacher say, "Whatever gets you through the night." Elton liked the line, helped finish the track, and made a bet. If the song hit #1, Lennon would join him on stage. Lennon laughed it off. He hadn't performed live in years and didn't plan to start again. But the song did go to #1. So, true to his word, Lennon stepped onto the stage at Madison Square Garden in November 1974. It was his final live performance. Even more powerful, that night, he reunited with Yoko backstage. Everything changed from there. While Elton was riding this wave, he also dropped a playful duet that took the world by surprise. In 1976, he teamed up with Kiki D for Don't Go Breaking My Heart. It was bright, fun, and catchy, an intentional throwback to Motown-style duets. They even wrote it under fake names, just for fun. The song hit #1 in the UK for the first time in his career, and topped the US charts too. What's wild is, they originally wrote it for Dusty Springfield, but had to back out because she wasn't well. Elton even flipped his usual process. He wrote the music first, then Bernie Taupin added the lyrics. It became one of Elton's biggest hits, though it never showed up on a proper album. The B-side, a track called Snow Queen, didn't land the same. Elton and Bernie later distanced themselves from it, saying it came from a messy place. One of the biggest highlights of this entire era was the making of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. You'd think a double album that epic would take months to finish. But Elton made the whole thing in just 17 days. It didn't start smoothly. They first tried to record in Jamaica, but the studio was a disaster. Bad gear, security with guns, even threats of violence. They bailed and went to a peaceful chateau in France instead. That's where the magic happened. Each morning, Elton would wake up, sit at the piano, and write songs while eating breakfast. Sometimes it took him just 20 minutes to finish one. The band would record them that same day, usually in just a few takes. One of those songs was Candle in the Wind. Elton wrote it in the morning and recorded it right after. The result? 17 tracks. 76 minutes of music. A record that would go on to sell over 20 million copies and land on the list of the greatest albums ever made. It started with working titles like Vodka and Tonics, but ended up as one of the most iconic albums in rock history. In the 1970s, Elton John wasn't just a rock star, he lived like a king in a glittering world of excess. At the peak of his fame, he was spending over $40,000 a week just on shopping. After one U.S. tour, he returned to England with 67 suitcases and 42 trunks stuffed with everything he had bought. His taste became more outrageous the more cocaine he used. He once bought a radio shaped like a doll in a see-through negligee, with the volume knobs on its chest. Another time, he bought a full-size gorilla statue dressed in Edwardian clothing. But the wildest moment came after a 3-day coke binge, when he decided to buy an actual tram from Australia. Not a model, but a real one that had to be flown to Britain and lowered into his garden with 2 Chinook helicopters. He even bought a life-size T-Rex. Years later, he auctioned off most of his bizarre collection and made over $8 million. The drug use didn't just affect his spending. One night in New York, while staying at a hotel with John Lennon, the two were deep into a cocaine binge. It was 2 a.m., and they were both high and paranoid, convinced someone was coming for them. When there was a knock at the door, Elton panicked. He whispered, "Is that the police?" And it took him 5 minutes just to look through the peephole. It wasn't the cops, it was Andy Warhol. But instead of letting the artist in, they froze. Lennon refused to open the door. Warhol knocked and rang the bell, but the two musicians stayed silent, pretending they weren't there. Eventually, Warhol gave up and left. Later, Lennon laughed about it, saying, "That was the fun part of cocaine." Back then, Elton was also a regular at Studio 54, the famous New York nightclub where the rich and famous partied without limits. He often showed up in his wildest costumes, joining friends like Liza Minnelli and Bianca Jagger on the dance floor. Sometimes Liza and Bianca would even sing impromptu duets for the crowd, while Warhol snapped pictures. It was a place where anything could happen, and usually did. Elton admitted he was at his most out of control during this time, staying awake for days on end, smoking weed, drinking whiskey, and riding the high. Despite all this madness, Elton still made history. In 1979, during the Cold War, he became the first openly flamboyant Western rock star to perform in the Soviet Union. He played 8 concerts in Moscow and Leningrad. Tickets were so sought after that some people paid a third of their monthly salary just to get in. He was nervous. He wasn't sure if anyone in the USSR even knew who he was. Soviet officials told him not to perform the Beatles' Back in the USSR. So, of course, he did. Elton later joked that if the KGB had been watching him, they should have known better than to tell him what not to do. After the tour, even the British Embassy called it one of the most important cultural moments between East and West since Khrushchev's visit to Hollywood in 1959. By the early 1980s, Elton John's life was spinning out of control. His cocaine use had taken over. He blacked out so often, he started destroying hotel rooms without even remembering it. Some days, he wouldn't shower for 3 or 4 days in a row. He'd drink a full bottle of scotch, binge on pornography, and barely speak to anyone. He also battled bulimia, starving himself for days, then binging on bacon sandwiches and ice cream, only to throw it all up and start again. He later admitted, "I had no self-respect whatsoever. It was just fucking horrible." People around him stopped confronting him. He was too famous, too powerful. "No one dared say anything because of who I was," he said. The amount of cocaine he was using shocked even those used to the drug-fueled music scene in 1970s Los Angeles. Things hit another low point in 1983 while filming the music video for "I'm Still Standing" in Cannes. Members of Duran Duran thought it would be funny to get him drunk, and Elton went along with it. He drank either 6 or 8 vodka martinis in an hour, did a couple of lines of coke, and stumbled back to the set. There, he stripped completely naked and rolled around on the floor, demanding the cameras start filming. When his manager and boyfriend, John Reed, tried to stop him, Elton punched him so hard people thought he broke his nose. The next morning, his assistant showed him the trashed hotel room. When Elton asked what happened, the assistant just said, "Elton, you happened." Even before that, there were warning signs. In October 1975, Elton walked out in front of friends and family by the pool at his house and calmly said, "I have taken 85 Valiums. I shall die within the hour." Then he jumped into the pool, trying to drown himself. But his body wouldn't let him. He instinctively fought to stay alive. Paramedics came and pumped his stomach. The reaction from his family was cold. His grandmother just said, "I suppose we've all got to go home now." Amazingly, just one day later, he was on stage at Dodger Stadium, playing to a massive crowd. He later said it was the stress. "I'd been working non-stop for 5 years. But it was typical me. There was no way I was going to kill myself doing that." It wasn't even his first suicide attempt. Years earlier, Bernie Taupin had found him in the kitchen with his head in the oven. But the gas was set to low, the windows were open, and Elton was lying on a pillow. Even in trying to end it, he couldn't fully commit. By the late 1980s, friends were still trying to help, but he wasn't ready to listen. At a wild party in LA, George Harrison saw what was happening and tried to step in. Elton was high and completely out of it, showing Bob Dylan around the garden without even realizing who he was. He actually mistook Dylan for a staff member and offered to help him change his clothes. That's when George confronted him directly. "Elton, I really think you need to go steady on the old marching powder," he said. But Elton just laughed it off. Even though George kept trying to talk to him over the years, Elton couldn't face the truth yet. It would take several more years of chaos and damage before he finally got clean in 1990. In the late 1980s, Elton John was struggling. He was addicted to cocaine and alcohol. He also battled bulimia and was heading down a dangerous path. But then, something unexpected happened that changed his life. He met a teenage boy named Ryan White. Ryan had hemophilia and had gotten HIV from a bad blood transfusion. People treated Ryan unfairly because of his illness, but Elton saw something special in him. They met in 1985 and became close friends. Elton visited Ryan often while he was sick. When Ryan died in 1990 at only 18 years old, Elton was heartbroken. He was a pallbearer at the funeral and sang Skyline Pigeon in front of 1,500 people. That moment shook him deeply. Years later, Elton said, "I wanted to help Ryan and his family, but they helped me even more." Within 6 months of Ryan's death, Elton finally got sober after 16 years of addiction. He had come close to dying many times. He had seizures, passed out, and turned blue. But Ryan's courage and the kindness of his family gave Elton the push he needed. Even though the AIDS crisis was happening all around him, it was Ryan who helped him see the truth. After getting sober, Elton wanted to do more. In 1992, he started the Elton John AIDS Foundation. He wanted to fight the disease that had taken his friend. At that time, many people still feared and judged those with AIDS, but Elton used his fame to bring attention to the issue. The foundation gave money to support those most at risk, like sex workers, drug users, and men who have sex with men. Over time, it became one of the biggest and most respected AIDS organizations in the world. It gave out millions of dollars in grants, supported over 1,000 projects, and kept working toward the goal of ending AIDS for good. Elton's mission was personal. He stayed involved, making sure the foundation focused on both helping people right away and changing the bigger system. It wasn't just a celebrity charity, it was something real, born out of pain and love. Then, in 1997, tragedy struck again. Princess Diana died in a car crash in Paris. Elton had been close friends with her. Just a week later, he stood in Westminster Abbey at her funeral. Richard Branson had asked him to perform, and Elton and his longtime lyricist, Bernie Taupin, rewrote their old song, "Candle in the Wind," to honor Diana. The new version opened with the line, "Goodbye, England's Rose." Elton was terrified of messing up in front of millions of viewers. He used a teleprompter to make sure he didn't forget the words. Later, he called it one of the most surreal moments of his life. Right after the funeral, he recorded the new version of the song. It was finished in just 2 takes. The song became a global phenomenon. It sold over 3 million copies in 1 week in the US alone. In total, it sold 33 million copies worldwide, becoming the best-selling single of all time. Still, Elton has never performed it again. He wanted it to remain a one-time tribute to Diana. Less than a year later, Elton had another life-changing moment. On February 24, 1998, he stood in Buckingham Palace. The Queen tapped him on each shoulder with a sword, and he became Sir Elton John. It was a huge honor. He was the first openly gay musician to be knighted. There was even a funny mistake. The announcer called him Sir John Elton by accident. After the ceremony, Elton said the Queen told him she knew he must be busy, but was glad he came. He had already been made a commander of the British Empire in 1995, but this knighthood was even more special. It recognized both his music and his work to fight AIDS at a time when many people were still afraid to talk about it. Years later, Prince Charles, now King Charles III, gave him another rare award, making him a member of the Order of the Companions of Honor. Only 65 people in the country have that title. Elton John's path through musical theater is full of bold moves, big risks, and unforgettable moments. One of the most remarkable chapters began when he brought The Lion King from screen to stage. At first, not everyone was on board. Roy E. Disney, a top executive, even admitted he wasn't a fan of Elton's music, but Tim Rice, Elton's longtime lyricist, fought hard for him. Even after getting the job, challenges didn't stop. At one point, Elton found out that "Can You Feel the Love Tonight" had been completely cut from the movie. He immediately called Disney's CEO and demanded it be put back. The song stayed and went on to win an Oscar. That same determination carried over when The Lion King premiered as a stage musical in July 1997 in Minneapolis. Just a few months later, it opened on Broadway and was an instant hit. The show became a worldwide phenomenon, eventually grossing over $8 billion and becoming the highest-earning title in entertainment history, more than any movie or show ever made. It's still running today, with over 10,000 performances and counting. Elton didn't stop there. In 2005, he took on another powerful story with Billy Elliot. Set during the miners' strike in the 1980s England, the musical followed a young boy who wants to dance ballet. Elton's music gave the story emotional depth, and critics praised the show from the start. It won major theater awards in London and swept the Tonys in New York. A memorable moment came when the three original Billies reunited on stage for the first anniversary performance, joined by Elton himself. The show's impact was so strong that a filmed version shown in cinemas topped the box office in the UK and Ireland, something that had never happened with a stage show before. After The Lion King, Elton realized he had found a new calling. He once said the musical gave him the chance to write for the stage for the first time. Over the years, he created Ada, Billy Elliot, The Vampire Lestat, and most recently, Tammy Faye, which opened on Broadway in 2024. That show, about televangelists Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker, featured lyrics by Jake Shears and starred major theater talents like Christian Borle and Katie Braben. Elton's musicals haven't just won awards, they've set records. Billy Elliot once tied with The Producers for the most Tony nominations in history. And The Lion King hit a new high in 2023 when it earned over $4 million in a single week, decades after its debut. In July 2024, while vacationing in the south of France, 77-year-old Elton John got an eye infection. At first, it seemed like something small, but it quickly became serious. The infection damaged his right eye so badly that he lost his vision in it completely. In September, he shared on Instagram that he had been quietly recovering at home all summer. A few months later, in November, he spoke openly about what had happened during an interview on Good Morning America. "I unfortunately lost my eyesight in my right eye in July," he said. "It's been 4 months now since I haven't been able to see." The healing process was slow and painful. Doctors weren't sure if his sight would ever come back. Elton also admitted that his left eye wasn't doing well either. His vision overall had become badly damaged. By March 2025, his eyesight had gotten so poor that he could no longer sign his full name. For a man who had signed thousands of autographs over 5 decades, this was heartbreaking. He had to change his autograph to a simple E and a kiss for the special edition of his new album, Who Believes in Angels? The album, priced at £24.99, came with a note explaining why the signature was different. Elton later said he almost didn't finish the album. He was afraid his eyesight would stop him. In an interview with BBC Radio 2, he admitted he started writing it from a very dark place of doubt. Even after all his years of making music, he said, "I had more doubt on this record than I had ever had in my life." But with help from American singer Brandi Carlile and his longtime friend Bernie Taupin, he pushed through. The album became a symbol of both his pain and his strength. In more interviews, Elton shared just how much his life had changed. "I can't see anything. I can't read anything. I can't watch anything," he said. He felt stuck and overwhelmed. Even doing daily tasks was hard. He explained that making music was especially tough because he couldn't see the lyrics. Still, he found reasons to be grateful. "I'm the luckiest man in the world," he said, as he prepared to release his Disney Plus documentary, Elton John, Never Too Late. This vision crisis wasn't his only health issue. He had already gone through knee and hip replacements and even surgery for prostate cancer. Looking back on it all, he spoke honestly about getting older. "This is the latter time of my life. I don't know how much time I have left," he said. "You think about that more when you get to my age." On December 1st, 2024, Elton appeared at the opening night of The Devil Wears Prada musical at London's Dominion Theatre. Stars like Anna Wintour, Donatella Versace, and Lily Collins were there. Elton, wearing bright red sunglasses, stood on stage and told the crowd, "I haven't been able to come to many of the previews because, as you know, I have lost my eyesight. He added, "It's hard for me to see it, but I love to hear it, and boy, it sounded good tonight." The night was also a fundraiser for the Elton John AIDS Foundation. His husband, David Furnish, guided him on and off the stage and stood by him throughout the evening. Elton called him his rock. Even though he couldn't see the show he helped create, his passion for music and theater was still alive. From Billy Elliot to The Lion King, and now The Devil Wears Prada, Elton John kept finding ways to create, even in darkness.